Hello and welcome. Tonight, we walk into a story that rarely finds its place in the spotlight. A story not of generals whose names fill the textbooks, nor of great speeches that echo through the halls of history. This is about those who were forgotten. The men and women who marched, fought, bled, and often died without fanfare. They carried rifles older than themselves. They wore uniforms stitched from borrowed cloth. Their names, for the most part, have been erased by time. And yet without them, the war as we know it would never have unfolded. Just as the Battle of Antietam was called America's bloodiest day, there were countless days across the world where forgotten soldiers left their mark in silence. Tonight we follow their shadows, we listen to their echoes, we remember those whom history left behind. The year is 1939. The world stands on the edge of an abyss. Smoke rises from Polish villages, the thunder of boots echoes across cobbled streets. From Europe's heart to Asia's edge, an old world is cracking open, and in this breaking, the forgotten take their place. Farmers turned soldiers, porters turned carriers of guns, children turned into messengers of war. Their stories do not appear in the grand strategies of generals, but in the small acts of survival. Imagine a young boy in Warsaw, clutching a piece of bread beneath his coat, running through alleys where German soldiers march with rifles on their shoulders. He is not a soldier in uniform, yet his courage feeds the resistance. Or a man from the Ukrainian steppe, who had never left his village until the war dragged him into trenches where winter killed more than bullets. He is swallowed by snow, his name written nowhere, his sacrifice a ghost in the ice. Across the continent, in France, Algerian troops disembark from crowded ships, their turbans wrapped tight against the cold. They have left behind farms and families in North Africa to fight in a war that was not theirs. They march down European roads singing songs in languages their commanders do not understand. History remembers the fall of Paris, but not the men from distant deserts who fought to defend it. In Britain, young men from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from Barbados, cross oceans to serve in a land they have never seen. They sit in mess halls where the color of their skin sets them apart. Yet in the skies above the English Channel, they fight the same enemy. Pilots from the Caribbean lift their machines into clouds thick with gunfire. Their names appear rarely in headlines, but without them, the Battle of Britain might have been lost. In the east, China bleeds. Villages burn as Japanese troops march deeper into the land. Forgotten soldiers rise from the countryside, peasants wielding rifles, students carrying grenades, women ferrying supplies through mountain passes. For them, the war is not a campaign of strategy, but of survival itself. Entire towns erased in a single night, yet survivors continue to fight. Their courage, too often untold, carved the shape of the struggle in Asia. And then, Africa. From Senegal to Kenya, from Nigeria to Ethiopia, men are pulled into uniform. They march beneath flags of empires that rule them, not nations of their own. They dig trenches in North Africa, carry ammunition through desert sands, guard supply lines under a scorching sun. Some never see battle but labor until their bodies collapse. Others fight in Italy, scaling mountains under fire. When victory is declared, they return home not as heroes, but as subjects once more. The forgotten stand everywhere. A Russian woman clutching a rifle lying silent in the snow, waiting for a German soldier to pass. Her bullet will save her comrades, though no monument will ever bear her name. A Filipino nurse, treating wounded under a bamboo roof while Japanese shells fall nearby. She has no weapon, yet her courage holds a line stronger than steel. A Sudanese driver, steering his truck through desert storms, delivering supplies to men he has never met. His journey is endless, his sacrifice unrecognized. The war begins not just with great leaders, but with countless nameless ones. And in the first years, as the world collapses into conflict, it is they who carry the burden. Think of the convoys crossing the icy North Sea. British sailors, Canadian deckhands, Norwegian fishermen turned warriors. They face waves higher than the masts, winds that freeze the skin. Enemy submarines stalk beneath the water, unseen, deadly. Each voyage is a gamble. Some ships never arrive. Their crews vanish beneath the waves, swallowed by oceans colder than memory. History counts the tonnage of supplies delivered, but not the frozen hands that tied the ropes, the young men who drowned in silence. Or look to the deserts of Libya and Egypt. Under the burning sun, Indian soldiers march beside Australians and South Africans. Sandstorms blind them, dehydration cripples them, yet they hold their rifles steady. Letters are written by flickering lamplight sent across oceans many never delivered. Their families wait in villages half a world away, never knowing if their sons live or die. When the war is recalled, the names of generals are spoken. But who remembers the Sikh soldier who stood at El Alamein, his turban wrapped against the dust, his courage unshaken? In the jungles of Burma, the air hums with insects. Rain falls like endless sheets of glass. African battalions are sent to fight an enemy they cannot see. The forest itself is hostile, leeches, snakes, fevers. Yet they march. They carry supplies on their backs, wounded comrades on their shoulders. Their footsteps sink into mud, washed away by storms, their memory washed away by history. In the skies above Europe, a Polish pilot grips the controls of his fighter. He escaped a homeland already lost, flying now for Britain, for freedom, for survival. His accent marks him as foreign, his bravery as universal. Each mission may be his last. When he falls, there will be no family to bury him, no grave to mark his name. Only clouds witness his passing. Across oceans, Pacific islands burn beneath bombardment. The people who call them home, fishermen, farmers, children, are pulled into a war they never sought. They guide Allied soldiers through jungles, carry messages across treacherous waters, nurse the wounded in bamboo huts. Some die, unrecorded. Others live, but their memories are never written down. Their islands become battlefields, their lives forever changed, their stories nearly lost. The forgotten are everywhere, in every corner of this global war. And though they are invisible in textbooks, their presence shaped every battle. For each tank that rolled forward, 1,000 unseen hands fueled it. For each soldier who advanced, 100 others carried his supplies. For each victory celebrated in parades, countless sacrifices went unnoticed, unnamed, unsung. As the war spreads, the world fractures. Yet in the cracks, in the shadows, the forgotten continue their march. They are the heartbeat of the war, steady, relentless, unacknowledged. And tonight, as we retrace their steps, we breathe life into their silence. We honor those who history left behind. Because history may forget their names, but we do not have to. Tonight, they rise again, not in stone monuments or grand speeches, but in whispers, in memory, in the stories we choose to tell. Hello and welcome. Tonight, we walk into a story that rarely finds its place in the spotlight. A story not of generals whose names fill the textbooks, nor of great speeches that echo through the halls of history. This is about those who were forgotten, the men and women who marched, fought, bled, and often died without fanfare. They carried rifles older than themselves. They wore uniforms stitched from borrowed cloth. Their names, for the most part, have been erased by time, and yet, without them, the war as we know it would never have unfolded. Just as the Battle of Antietam was called America's bloodiest day, there were countless days across the world where forgotten soldiers left their mark in silence. Tonight, we follow their shadows. We listen to their echoes. We remember those whom history left behind. The year is 1939. The world stands on the edge of an abyss. Smoke rises from Polish villages. The thunder of boots echoes across cobbled streets. From Europe's heart to Asia's edge, an old world is cracking open. And in this breaking, the forgotten take their place. Farmers turned soldiers, porters turned carriers of guns, children turned into messengers of war. Their stories do not appear in the grand strategies of generals, but in the small acts of survival. Imagine a young boy in Warsaw, clutching a piece of bread beneath his coat, running through alleys where German soldiers march with rifles on their shoulders. He is not a soldier in uniform, yet his courage feeds the resistance. Or a man from the Ukrainian steppe, who had never left his village until the war dragged him into trenches where winter killed more than bullets. He is swallowed by snow, his name written nowhere, his sacrifice a ghost in the ice. Across the continent, in France, Algerian troops disembark from crowded ships, their turbans wrapped tight against the cold. They have left behind farms and families in North Africa to fight in a war that was not theirs. They march down European roads, singing songs in languages their commanders do not understand. History remembers the fall of Paris, but not the men from distant deserts who fought to defend it. In Britain, young men from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from Barbados cross oceans to serve in a land they have never seen. They sit in mess halls where the color of their skin sets them apart. Yet in the skies above the English Channel, they fight the same enemy. Pilots from the Caribbean lift their machines into clouds thick with gunfire. Their names appear rarely in headlines, but without them, the Battle of Britain might have been lost. In the east, China bleeds. Villages burn as Japanese troops march deeper into the land. Forgotten soldiers rise from the countryside, peasants wielding rifles, students carrying grenades, women ferrying supplies through mountain passes. For them, the war is not a campaign of strategy, but of survival itself. Entire towns erased in a single night, yet survivors continue to fight. Their courage, too often untold, carved the shape of the struggle in Asia. And then Africa. From Senegal to Kenya, from Nigeria to Ethiopia, men are pulled into uniform. They march beneath flags of empires that rule them, not nations of their own. They dig trenches in North Africa, carry ammunition through desert sands, guard supply lines under a scorching sun. Some never see battle but labor until their bodies collapse. Others fight in Italy, scaling mountains under fire. When victory is declared, they return home not as heroes, but as subjects once more. The forgotten stand everywhere. A Russian woman clutching a rifle lying silent in the snow, waiting for a German soldier to pass. Her bullet will save her comrades, though no monument will ever bear her name. A Filipino nurse treating wounded under a bamboo roof while Japanese shells fall nearby. She has no weapon, yet her courage holds a line stronger than steel. A Sudanese driver steering his truck through desert storms, delivering supplies to men he has never met. His journey is endless, his sacrifice unrecognized. The war begins not just with great leaders, but with countless nameless ones. And in the first years, as the world collapses into conflict, it is they who carry the burden. Think of the convoys crossing the icy North Sea. British sailors, Canadian deckhands, Norwegian fishermen turned warriors. They face waves higher than the masts, winds that freeze the skin. Enemy submarines stalk beneath the water, unseen, deadly. Each voyage is a gamble. Some ships never arrive. Their crews vanish beneath the waves, swallowed by oceans colder than memory. History counts the tonnage of supplies delivered, but not the frozen hands that tied the ropes, the young men who drowned in silence. Or look to the deserts of Libya and Egypt. Under the burning sun, Indian soldiers march beside Australians and South Africans. Sandstorms blind them, dehydration cripples them, yet they hold their rifles steady. Letters are written by flickering lamplight sent across oceans, many never delivered. Their families wait in villages half a world away, never knowing if their sons live or die. When the war is recalled, the names of generals are spoken, but who remembers the Sikh soldier who stood at El Alamein, his turban wrapped against the dust, his courage unshaken? In the jungles of Burma, the air hums with insects. Rain falls like endless sheets of glass. African battalions are sent to fight an enemy they cannot see. The forest itself is hostile. Leeches, snakes, fevers, yet they march. They carry supplies on their backs, wounded comrades on their shoulders. Their footsteps sink into mud, washed away by storms, their memory washed away by history. In the skies above Europe, a Polish pilot grips the controls of his fighter. He escaped a homeland already lost, flying now for Britain, for freedom, for survival. His accent marks him as foreign, his bravery as universal. Each mission may be his last. When he falls, there will be no family to bury him, no grave to mark his name. Only clouds witness his passing. Across oceans, Pacific islands burn beneath bombardment. The people who call them home, fishermen, farmers, children, are pulled into a war they never sought. They guide Allied soldiers through jungles, carry messages across treacherous waters, nurse the wounded in bamboo huts. Some die unrecorded, others live, but their memories are never written down. Their islands become battlefields, their lives forever changed, their stories nearly lost. The forgotten are everywhere, in every corner of this global war, and though they are invisible in textbooks, their presence shaped every battle. For each tank that rolled forward, 1,000 unseen hands fueled it. For each soldier who advanced, 100 others carried his supplies. For each victory celebrated in parades, countless sacrifices went unnoticed, unnamed, unsung. As the war spreads, the world fractures. Yet in the cracks, in the shadows, the forgotten continue their march. They are the heartbeat of the war, steady, relentless, unacknowledged. And tonight, as we retrace their steps, we breathe life into their silence. We honor those who history left behind. Because history may forget their names, but we do not have to. Tonight, they rise again, not in stone monuments or grand speeches, but in whispers in memory, in the stories we choose to tell. The jungle breathes, heavy, humid, alive. Each leaf drips with rain that never seems to end. Each vine curls like a serpent waiting to strike. The air is thick, clinging to the skin, filling the lungs until every breath feels like drowning. This is Burma, a place where war comes not only from the barrel of a gun, but from the earth itself. Here, forgotten soldiers take their place. Chinese regiments trudging through mud waist-deep, Burmese recruits in uniforms that rot in the damp air, African battalions shipped across oceans to fight in a land they could barely imagine. They do not face just the enemy. They face the jungle, a wilderness that swallows entire divisions whole. Monsoon rain falls like endless glass shards. It pounds on helmets, soaks through boots, drowns weapons in mud. Rifles rust overnight. Ammunition turns useless. Leech-covered legs march forward step after step, bleeding, itching, aching. The jungle consumes everything. Food rots before it can be eaten. Clothes tear to shreds. Even maps dissolve in the damp, yet still they push forward. The enemy is unseen, slipping between trees, vanishing into foliage. One moment silence, the next the crack of gunfire. A patrol disappears, their bodies never found. Trails become traps, rivers run red, paths collapse into ambush. The line between soldier and prey blurs in the suffocating green. For the British Empire, the road to India must be held. And so men from across the world are thrown into Burma's depths. Nigerians, Ghanaians, Rhodesians, men who grew up beneath African suns, now struggling beneath a different sky. Their skin glistens with sweat, their lungs choke with humidity. They carry supplies on their backs, drag artillery through swamps, clear paths with machetes. They are laborers and soldiers at once, but their sacrifice is rarely spoken of. At night, the jungle comes alive in ways more terrifying than day. Crickets shriek, frogs croak in deafening chorus, unseen creatures rustle in the dark. Fires are forbidden, too dangerous, too revealing, so men sit in the pitch black, their eyes straining to pierce the night. Each rustle could be an enemy, each shadow could be death. Sleep becomes impossible, hunger unbearable, fear constant. Imagine a young Chinese soldier no older than 20 clutching a rifle as rain drips from the barrel. His boots are gone, rotted away in the swamp. His feet are wrapped in cloth torn from his uniform, already bleeding with sores. Still he marches. Behind him, a Burmese guide leads the way, his machete clearing vines, his knowledge of hidden trails the only hope of survival. And alongside them, an African porter struggles beneath a load heavier than his own body weight, sweat blinding his eyes. 3 men from 3 worlds bound together in a jungle that does not care if they live or die. Their letters home speak of strange lands, unbearable hardships, and hope for a return that many would never see. Families wait for them across continents, mothers in villages along the Yangtze River, wives in small huts in Uganda, children in Burmese towns already destroyed by bombings. For many, silence is the only reply. Their names vanish into casualty lists, their graves swallowed by roots and vines. The battles here are not glorious. They are battles of endurance. A hill taken today, lost tomorrow. A road cleared in blood, washed away by monsoon rains. The Japanese advance is relentless, but so is the determination of those who fight back. They build makeshift bridges out of bamboo, carry wounded men on stretchers woven from vines, share the last scraps of rice between entire squads. Disease kills more than bullets. Malaria, dysentery, cholera. Men collapse mid-march, trembling with fever, their comrades forced to carry them or leave them behind. Hospitals overflow with men wasted by sickness. Some recover only to return to the jungle, others never rise again. Doctors do what they can, but medicine runs out, supplies vanish, and the jungle consumes the rest. And yet through all of it, courage endures. Small victories emerge in the green chaos. A patrol reaching its destination despite ambushes, a bridge held long enough for reinforcements to cross, a group of villagers risking everything to guide soldiers through enemy territory. In the silence of the jungle, courage is not loud. It is steady, quiet, persistent. There are moments of humanity even here, soldiers sharing stories of home, though they come from lands that seem worlds apart. An African soldier describing wide savannas beneath a blazing sun. A Chinese recruit speaking of crowded streets filled with lanterns. A Burmese villager telling of festivals that once filled the night with laughter. For a brief moment, the war fades, and they are simply men remembering home. But the jungle always calls them back, dragging them once more into the endless fight. Supply lines stretch thin. Porters carry crates of ammunition, sacks of rice, barrels of fuel on their backs, trudging through miles of mud. Many collapse, exhausted, never rising again. Without them, the armies would starve, yet their names do not appear in war records. They vanish, as though they never lived, though every bullet fired owed itself to their sacrifice. The sound of crickets is louder than gunfire. The jungle hums, constant, unbroken, indifferent to the struggles of men, and yet in that noise soldiers move silently, rifles ready, machetes sharp. Each rustle of leaves may conceal an ambush, each bird call may signal a trap. Suspicion becomes survival, silence becomes weapon. At the height of the campaign, whole divisions vanish into the green. Units cut off by rivers, trails washed away, ambushes from all sides. Men lost, wandering in circles, starving, sick, forgotten. Only the jungle remains constant, swallowing bodies, reclaiming weapons, leaving nothing behind but silence. Yet from this silence, legends grow, of men who fought for days without food, holding a position against impossible odds, of carriers who walked barefoot for weeks, delivering supplies that saved thousands, of women who risked their lives to carry messages, guiding soldiers along hidden trails. These stories rarely reached beyond the jungle. They whispered among survivors, carried in fading voices, then lost to time. The war in Burma is remembered in maps and strategies, but not in sweat and blood. The forgotten soldiers fought a war not of glory, but of survival. Their medals were mud, their victories measured in steps taken, rivers crossed, breaths endured. They did not ask for monuments. They asked only to live, to see the end of the rain, to walk once more beneath the skies of home. When the guns finally fell silent, many did not return. Some remained buried beneath roots and vines, their graves unmarked, their stories untold. Others returned home broken, sick, or simply invisible to the nations they had served. Their sacrifices left in silence, their courage ignored. But the jungle remembers. The vines curl around rusting rifles, the roots twist through forgotten helmets, the rain washes over bones hidden in the earth. The jungle keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its witnesses. And if you listen closely, if you hear the hum of insects, the drip of rain, the whisper of leaves, you may hear them still. Forgotten soldiers who marched where no maps could guide them. Men who fought enemies both human and unseen. Courage carved not in glory, but in endurance. They were the silent front, holding the road to India, holding the line against the impossible. And though history may not speak their names tonight, we do. Tonight, they walk again, not in the mud of Burma, but in memory. Their silence breaks, their story breathes, their courage endures. The jungle breathes, heavy, humid, alive. Each leaf drips with rain that never seems to end. Each vine curls like a serpent waiting to strike. The air is thick, clinging to the skin, filling the lungs until every breath feels like drowning. This is Burma, a place where war comes not only from the barrel of a gun, but from the earth itself. Here, forgotten soldiers take their place. Chinese regiments trudging through mud waist-deep. Burmese recruits in uniforms that rot in the damp air. African battalions shipped across oceans to fight in a land they could barely imagine. They do not face just the enemy. They face the jungle, a wilderness that swallows entire divisions whole. Monsoon rain falls like endless glass shards. It pounds on helmets, soaks through boots, drowns weapons in mud. Rifles rust overnight. Ammunition turns useless. Leech-covered legs march forward step after step, bleeding, itching, aching. The jungle consumes everything. Food rots before it can be eaten, clothes tear to shreds, even maps dissolve in the damp, yet still they push forward. The enemy is unseen, slipping between trees, vanishing into foliage. One moment silence, the next the crack of gunfire. A patrol disappears, their bodies never found. Trails become traps, rivers run red, paths collapse into ambush. The line between soldier and prey blurs in the suffocating green. For the British Empire, the road to India must be held, and so men from across the world are thrown into Burma's depths. Nigerians, Ghanaians, Rhodesians, men who grew up beneath African suns, now struggling beneath a different sky. Their skin glistens with sweat, their lungs choke with humidity, they carry supplies on their backs, drag artillery through swamps, clear paths with machetes. They are laborers and soldiers at once, but their sacrifice is rarely spoken of. At night, the jungle comes alive in ways more terrifying than day. Crickets shriek, frogs croak in deafening chorus, unseen creatures rustle in the dark. Fires are forbidden, too dangerous, too revealing, so men sit in the pitch black, their eyes straining to pierce the night. Each rustle could be an enemy, each shadow could be death. Sleep becomes impossible, hunger unbearable, fear constant. Imagine a young Chinese soldier, no older than 20, clutching a rifle as rain drips from the barrel. His boots are gone, rotted away in the swamp. His feet are wrapped in cloth torn from his uniform, already bleeding with sores. Still, he marches. Behind him, a Burmese guide leads the way, his machete clearing vines, his knowledge of hidden trails the only hope of survival. And alongside them, an African porter struggles beneath a load heavier than his own body weight, sweat blinding his eyes. 3 men from 3 worlds bound together in a jungle that does not care if they live or die. Their letters home speak of strange lands, unbearable hardships, and hope for a return that many would never see. Families wait for them across continents, mothers in villages along the Yangtze River, wives in small huts in Uganda, children in Burmese towns already destroyed by bombings. For many, silence is the only reply. Their names vanish into casualty lists, their graves swallowed by roots and vines. The battles here are not glorious. They are battles of endurance. A hill taken today, lost tomorrow, a road cleared in blood, washed away by monsoon rains. The Japanese advance is relentless, but so is the determination of those who fight back. They build makeshift bridges out of bamboo, carry wounded men on stretchers woven from vines, share the last scraps of rice between entire squads. Disease kills more than bullets. Malaria, dysentery, cholera. Men collapse mid-march, trembling with fever, their comrades forced to carry them or leave them behind. Hospitals overflow with men wasted by sickness. Some recover only to return to the jungle, others never rise again. Doctors do what they can, but medicine runs out, supplies vanish, and the jungle consumes the rest. And yet, through all of it, courage endures. Small victories emerge in the green chaos. A patrol reaching its destination despite ambushes, a bridge held long enough for reinforcements to cross, a group of villagers risking everything to guide soldiers through enemy territory. In the silence of the jungle, courage is not loud. It is steady, quiet, persistent. There are moments of humanity, even here. Soldiers sharing stories of home, though they come from lands that seem worlds apart. An African soldier describing wide savannas beneath a blazing sun. A Chinese recruit speaking of crowded streets filled with lanterns. A Burmese villager telling of festivals that once filled the night with laughter. For a brief moment, the war fades, and they are simply men remembering home. But the jungle always calls them back, dragging them once more into the endless fight. Supply lines stretch thin. Porters carry crates of ammunition, sacks of rice, barrels of fuel on their backs, trudging through miles of mud. Many collapse, exhausted, never rising again. Without them, the armies would starve, yet their names do not appear in war records. They vanish, as though they never lived, though every bullet fired owed itself to their sacrifice. The sound of crickets is louder than gunfire. The jungle hums, constant, unbroken, indifferent to the struggles of men, and yet in that noise soldiers move silently, rifles ready, machetes sharp. Each rustle of leaves may conceal an ambush. Each bird call may signal a trap. Suspicion becomes survival. Silence becomes weapon. At the height of the campaign, whole divisions vanish into the green, units cut off by rivers, trails washed away, ambushes from all sides. Men lost, wandering in circles, starving, sick, forgotten. Only the jungle remains constant, swallowing bodies, reclaiming weapons, leaving nothing behind but silence. Yet from this silence, legends grow. of men who fought for days without food, holding a position against impossible odds, of carriers who walked barefoot for weeks, delivering supplies that saved thousands, of women who risked their lives to carry messages, guiding soldiers along hidden trails. These stories rarely reached beyond the jungle. They whispered among survivors, carried in fading voices, then lost to time. The war in Burma is remembered in maps and strategies, but not in sweat and blood. The forgotten soldiers fought a war not of glory but of survival. Their medals were mud, their victories measured in steps taken, rivers crossed, breaths endured. They did not ask for monuments, they asked only to live, to see the end of the rain, to walk once more beneath the skies of home. When the guns finally fell silent, many did not return. Some remained buried beneath roots and vines, their graves unmarked, their stories untold. Others returned home broken, sick, or simply invisible to the nations they had served, their sacrifices left in silence, their courage ignored. But the jungle remembers. The vines curl around rusting rifles, the roots twist through forgotten helmets, the rain washes over bones hidden in the earth. The jungle keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its witnesses. And if you listen closely, if you hear the hum of insects, the drip of rain, the whisper of leaves, you may hear them still. Forgotten soldiers who marched where no maps could guide them. Men who fought enemies both human and unseen. Courage carved not in glory, but in endurance. They were the silent front, holding the road to India, holding the line against the impossible. And though history may not speak their names tonight, we do. Tonight they walk again, not in the mud of Burma, but in memory. Their silence breaks, their story breathes, their courage endures. The Caribbean Sea glitters beneath the sun, waters so blue they seem eternal. Palms sway on the wind, waves lap against white sand, and for centuries these islands lived with the rhythm of tides and trade winds. But in the years of war, even paradise was not spared. Beneath those turquoise waves lurked steel predators, German U-boats, silent hunters in the deep, and above them on scattered islands, men whose names history forgot kept watch. Dominican dock workers who once hauled crates of fruit and sugar now loaded shells into naval guns. Jamaican fishermen who once cast nets for snapper now scanned the horizon for periscopes. Trinidadian sailors, their voices heavy with the songs of Calypso, patrolled waters where few believed war could reach. The Caribbean, a sea of warmth and music, became a frontline few remember. The ports were busy, alive with ships carrying oil, bauxite, and food, supplies vital for armies across the world. Without these shipments, planes could not fly, tanks could not roll, cities could not be fed, and so German U-boats came hunting. They slipped through channels, surfaced beneath moonlight, and waited like sharks for convoys to pass. Merchant ships, tankers heavy with fuel, freighters stacked with cargo, all became prey. Explosions shattered the night, flames lit the waves, and men leapt into the sea, praying to be rescued before the sharks arrived. On shore, word spread quickly. The sea, once a friend, had become a graveyard. Families in Barbados, in Curacao, in Jamaica watched the horizon with fear. Children asked why ships no longer returned. Mothers wept when telegrams came, telling of husbands lost to waters that only yesterday had seemed so calm. Yet still the work continued. Dock workers repaired piers, sailors patrolled, fishermen scanned the waves. The men who kept watch were not professional soldiers. They were ordinary islanders, drawn into a global war by duty, by necessity, by empire. Their uniforms were often mismatched, their weapons outdated, their training brief. Yet they stood guard, night after night, day after day, eyes straining against the glare of sun, against the endless blue. Some joked that the sea itself was the enemy, that staring too long into the horizon could drive a man mad, but still they stared, for one missed shadow, one glimpse ignored, could mean another ship lost. Imagine a Jamaican fisherman, once used to pulling nets heavy with fish, now gripping binoculars, scanning waters for a ripple, a flash of metal. His boat rocks gently on the waves, but his heart is not calm. He knows that beneath the surface, a U-boat could be listening, could even be watching him now. He sings softly to steady his nerves, an old song of the sea, passed down from father to son. It comforts him, even as the fear grows. Trinidad's oil fields became targets, the lifeblood of Allied ships and planes. Fires lit the sky when tankers were struck. columns of smoke rising higher than the palms, drifting far across the sea. Workers in refineries knew the danger but carried on, sweating in the heat of machines, knowing each drop of fuel was worth its weight in blood. Dock workers stacked barrels, sailors carried hoses, and when alarms sounded, all ran for cover, hearts pounding. Yet they returned the next day, as if danger were just another tide to endure. Patrol boats cut across the waves, their crews alert, their eyes red with lack of sleep. Many were tiny craft, hardly fit for open ocean, but they carried men who would not turn back. They dropped depth charges, hoping to catch the unseen hunters below. When explosions thundered beneath the water, the men cheered, though they rarely knew if a submarine had truly been destroyed. At night, they listened to the sea, to the engines below, to the endless question of whether tomorrow would bring victory or loss. Some islanders joined the Royal Navy, leaving home to sail on destroyers and corvettes, ships that roamed far from the Caribbean. They fought in the Atlantic, escorting convoys through icy waters where waves towered higher than masts. They braved storms and torpedoes alike, learning quickly that the ocean was merciless. Many never returned. Their names appear only on stone plaques, their families remembering them through faded photos and half-forgotten stories. Life on shore was not untouched. Blackouts were ordered, windows covered at night, lights dimmed so that enemy submarines could not spot targets against the coast. Beaches once filled with laughter grew quiet as patrols walked the sand, rifles on shoulders. Children were told not to play too close to the water. Markets whispered with rumors of ships sunk, of spies on the islands, of men disappearing at sea. Fear became as constant as the tide. Yet even in fear, the people endured. Calypso singers turned war into song, verses about U-boats and convoys drifting through crowded streets. Humor softened sorrow, music lifted spirits, and in voices raised together, courage grew. Soldiers danced with island girls beneath lantern light, moments of warmth before returning to the cold reality of patrols. Life persisted, even with death so close. When ships went down, rescue was perilous. Survivors clung to wreckage, oil slicks burning around them, the sea alive with sharks. Local boats raced out, fishermen risking their lives to pull men from the water. Some saved dozens, pulling oil-soaked sailors aboard, covering them with blankets, sharing what little food and rum they had. Others arrived too late, finding only silence, only wreckage, only the dead. The war in the Caribbean never had the great battles of Europe or the Pacific. But it had sacrifice, quiet and steady, unrecognized by most. Dozens of ships were sunk, hundreds of men lost, thousands scarred by what they saw. The sea kept its secrets well. Wrecks lie still beneath the waves, covered in coral, visited only by divers who rarely know the names of those who went down with them. Think of a Trinidadian sailor barely 20 years old writing a letter home. "I am tired," he might say. "The sea is wide and the nights are long. We watch and we wait. Some nights I think the waves themselves are whispering to us. I do not know when I will return, but I will stand my watch for all of us." That letter may never arrive. It may sink with his ship, but the words remain in spirit, drifting like echoes across the sea. For many, recognition never came. When the war ended, medals were rare, parades even rarer. The great nations moved on, writing their histories without the dockworkers, the fishermen, the sailors of the islands. Life resumed. Sugar was harvested, calypso filled the air, tourists came once more to beaches. But for those who remembered, the sea was never the same. They knew what lay beneath. They knew the cost. Even now, traces remain. Rusting wrecks jutting from the surf, old piers scarred by explosions, graves with dates carved between 1939 and 1945. Families who still tell stories of grandfathers lost, of uncles who vanished, of brothers who never returned from patrol. The sea sparkles as always, the sun shines as always, but beneath the beauty lingers memory. The Forgotten Watch of the Caribbean was not just about war. It was about resilience, about ordinary men and women who stood where history might not look, yet who held firm all the same. Without them, convoys would have faltered, supplies would have failed, the war might have taken longer, cost more. Their role was small, but no less vital. As we drift through these memories tonight, imagine the quiet sound of waves against a hull. Imagine the faint light of stars above an endless horizon. Imagine standing on a deck, eyes straining for shadows, heart steady, breath cold. This was their world. This was their duty. They did not ask for it, but they carried it. And though their stories sank deep like the submarines they hunted, we can lift them now, bring them to the surface, let them breathe again. So let us remember the Dominican dock workers who hauled shells by hand, the Jamaican fishermen who turned nets into watchtowers, the Trinidadian sailors who patrolled an ocean too wide for any one ship. They stood the forgotten watch, night after night, their eyes on the sea, their lives given to protect a world that barely noticed them. But the sea remembers. The sea always remembers. And tonight, so do we. The sea is black, colder than stone, colder than memory. Ice forms on railings, on ropes, on the very breath of men. Ships creak under the weight of frost, their hulls groaning as though the ocean itself is trying to drag them down. This is the Arctic, a place where war is not only against an enemy of flesh and steel, but against the very world itself. And here, in these frozen waters, forgotten convoys carved their way toward destiny. From Halifax and Liverpool, from Reykjavik and Murmansk, ships gathered, slow, lumbering merchantmen, their holds filled with tanks, trucks, fuel, grain, and weapons. Behind them trailed destroyers, corvettes, and frigates, their guns scanning the darkness. Overhead, the northern sky sometimes burned with the green fire of the aurora, a beauty almost cruel against the suffering below. For these convoys carried hope for the Soviet Union, lifelines stretched across seas ruled by cold and death. Without them, the Eastern Front would have starved. With them, men bled into the snow. The sailors were drawn from every corner, Canadians hardened by Atlantic storms, Norwegians who knew the feel of icy winds better than sunlight, British crews weary from years at sea, Icelanders who had never imagined their small island would become a hub for global survival. Together they sailed into seas no sane man would choose, bound not by glory but by orders, by necessity, by the promise that without them, millions would fall. The cold was the first enemy. It coated decks in glassy ice, turning each step into a gamble with death. Sailors swung hammers against frozen ropes, beat lifeboats free from frost, chipped ice from guns before they could fire. Fingers split, skin tore, breath turned to shards of glass in the lungs. A wave across the deck could drench a man, and within minutes his clothes would stiffen into armor of ice, dragging him down, freezing him alive. Even when no shells fell, men died. Frostbite ate at toes, at fingers, at faces, blackening them into useless stumps. Infirmaries filled not with wounds of battle, but with wounds of winter. A medic's hands shook as he cut away frozen flesh, not from fear, but from cold that no blanket could fight. Sailors joked grimly that death here was quiet, creeping, no need for bullets when the sea itself was enemy enough. But the sea was not their only foe. German U-boats prowled beneath the waves, silent as sharks, waiting for a gap in the convoy. At night, when the aurora lit the sky, ships stood out as silhouettes, targets painted in green light. Torpedoes struck with sudden thunder, flames ripping open the dark. Men leapt into freezing water, their cries sharp, their lives measured in minutes before the cold claimed them. Rescue was perilous, boats lowered into seas that could capsize them in an instant, sailors pulling comrades aboard only to watch them stiffen and fall silent, the cold too deep to escape. From above, aircraft hunted. Long-range bombers swept from occupied Norway, dropping bombs onto ships already battered by storm. Anti-aircraft gunners fired through gloves stiff with frost, their eyes blurred by snow and exhaustion. Sometimes the sky itself seemed to fall upon them, snow and bombs and darkness blending into one. And still, the convoys sailed, day after day, night after night, through storms that turned seas into mountains, waves crashing over decks, tearing men from railings, swallowing them whole. The Arctic took lives without hesitation, indifferent to sides, to flags, to causes. Germans froze just as surely, their U-boats cracking under the pressure of ice. In these waters, victory was survival, nothing more. Imagine a Canadian sailor, no older than 19, standing on deck with a rifle in his hands, though he knows it is useless against submarines. His breath freezes against his collar, his eyes burn from the salt and snow. He stares into the horizon, not for beauty, but for shadows that mean death. Somewhere far behind him, his mother waits by a stove, a letter folded in her pocket. He does not know if he will see her again. He only knows that his ship must not stop. Picture a Norwegian helmsman, his hands raw on the wheel, steering through waters he has known since childhood. He remembers fishing boats, nets heavy with cod, his father's voice calling from the shore. Now, the nets are gone, the boats sunk, the shore occupied. His family hides under foreign boots. For him, this convoy is not just duty. It is revenge. It is survival. It is the chance to strike back against those who have taken everything. Think of an Icelandic dockworker pressed into service as a sailor, never before on seas beyond his island. He shivers beneath borrowed wool, seasick with every wave, terrified each time a siren sounds. Yet he stays at his post, because without him, without thousands like him, the chain breaks and men far away will fall. His fear is vast, but so is his courage, even if history will never remember his name. The Arctic convoys had code names, PQ, QP, JW, but to the men who sailed them, they were simply lifelines. Each ship carried enough supplies to arm divisions, to feed cities, to keep a nation alive. And for this they were hunted with relentless fury. Entire convoys were shattered, ships sinking one after another in fields of ice. Survivors watched their comrades vanish into black water, powerless to help, powerless even to scream. Silence often followed, broken only by the groan of ice against steel. When a ship sank, the sea offered no mercy. Men clung to wreckage, hands frozen to planks, eyes wide with terror. Rescue came too late for most. Lifeboats capsized, rafts drifted away, bodies stiffened and floated, frozen faces staring skyward. Those pulled aboard often died anyway, hearts stopping as the shock of warmth struck them. In the Arctic, survival was measured in minutes, and few minutes were enough. And yet, amidst all this suffering, there was strange beauty. The aurora danced above them, ribbons of green and violet across the black sky, mocking the fire below. Sailors stared at it in awe, whispering prayers or cursing the light that made them visible to their hunters. Snow fell soft at times, settling on shoulders like feathers, as though the sky itself sought to comfort the weary. The silence between storms could be profound, the ocean stretching endless and still, stars sharp as glass overhead. In those moments, men remembered the world they fought for. But such moments never lasted. The war pressed on. The convoys sailed again and again. Some men made the journey many times, each passage stealing another piece of their youth. They grew old before their time, faces lined by cold, eyes hollowed by loss. When the war ended, many never spoke of what they endured. Who would believe them? Who could imagine seas so cruel, cold so absolute, silence so deadly? Their sacrifice was buried beneath victories elsewhere. Stalingrad, Normandy, Berlin. These names filled books and speeches. The Arctic convoys remained a footnote, a line in reports, a medal given quietly to a few. Yet without them, the great victories could not have come. The Soviet armies that held against the German tide were fed and armed by ships that braved the northern seas. Their endurance kept the war alive. Their deaths paved the way to victory. Today, rusting hulks lie on the seabed, entombed in ice, guarded by silence. Divers sometimes visit, finding plates still set in mess halls, boots still lined by bunks, bones still resting where men once slept. The cold has preserved them, frozen sacrifice beneath frozen waves. They remain there, invisible to most, their stories unspoken, their names fading with time. But if you listen closely, the Arctic still whispers. The wind carries the voices of sailors calling across decades. The aurora burns not just with light, but with memory. Each flicker a life, each shimmer a sacrifice. And though history has overlooked them, the sea has not. The sea remembers every ship, every cry, every soul lost to its depths. So let us remember as well. The Canadian boys who stood watch in storms. The Norwegian sailors who fought for homes already gone. The British crews who returned again and again to those cursed waters. The Icelanders who gave their strength to ships that were never theirs. Forgotten men frozen into ice, their sacrifice hidden beneath northern lights. They sailed into seas that no man should, and they did it not for fame, but for duty, for survival, for one more chance at life for millions they would never meet. Tonight, as we drift into silence, hear the creak of frozen hulls, the whisper of wind across the Arctic, the soft hum of the aurora above. Imagine standing on deck, breath freezing in your throat, the ocean stretching endless and dark. You are one among many, forgotten yet essential, a light in the cold. And though the sea may claim you, though the world may forget you, the northern lights burn on, eternal witnesses to your sacrifice. The Pacific stretches wide, an ocean without end, scattered with islands like stepping stones left by the gods. Palms lean over turquoise lagoons, mountains rise green and sharp from the sea, and trails wind deep into jungles where light barely touches the ground. For centuries, life here moved with the tides and the seasons, fishing at dawn, harvesting taro and yams, songs by firelight under starlit skies. But then came war. Great empires crossed the ocean carrying steel, fire, and death, and on islands far from the world's attention, distant battles raged, battles fought in silence, battles remembered only by the land itself. Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Micronesia, places most soldiers had never heard of, names that seemed like whispers from a dream. Yet they became the center of a storm. Japanese troops landed first, building bases, cutting airstrips into jungles, fortifying coastlines. Soon the Allies came, Australians, Americans, New Zealanders, bringing their own machines, their own ambitions, their own war. Between them, caught in the middle, were the islanders, men and women who never sought battle yet who became its lifelines. They knew the trails, narrow and twisting, hidden beneath thick canopies. They knew the rivers swollen by rain, fast and treacherous. They knew the reefs, jagged teeth beneath calm water ready to tear open boats. To the foreign soldiers, the islands were traps, landscapes that devoured them. But to the people of the islands, they were home, and so they became guides, carriers, scouts, rescuers. Their war was not chosen, yet it carved scars that still remain. Imagine a soldier from the Solomon Islands, bare feet pressing into mud as he carries a stretcher. On it lies a wounded American, blood soaking his uniform, eyes clouded with fever. The trail climbs steep and sharp, rain falling in sheets, leeches clinging to skin. The soldier does not falter. He moves as his ancestors moved, one step at a time. Through terrain his body knows better than breath. The foreigner on the stretcher may never learn his name, but without him, he would not live to see another dawn. Think of villages in Papua New Guinea, whispering warnings of Japanese patrols moving through the jungle. They slip between shadows, silent as birds, watching, listening, then returning to the Allied camps with news that saves dozens of lives. They are not armed with rifles or bayonets, but with knowledge, with eyes sharp enough to read the forest like a map. Their whispers carry weight greater than bullets. Micronesian navigators guided boats across seas where compasses faltered. They read stars, waves, the flight of birds, the color of water, signs invisible to outsiders. They steered patrols through labyrinths of reefs, carrying messages between islands, rescuing survivors who drifted days without food or water. Their canoes cut across waves as silently as shadows, lifelines in an ocean too vast for maps. The jungle was both ally and enemy. Rain fell in torrents, flooding paths, turning camps into swamps. Mosquitoes swarmed, carrying malaria, leaving men shivering with fever. Snakes slid through undergrowth, crocodiles lurked in rivers, and leeches clung in silent hunger. Soldiers from faraway cities could not endure it alone, but the islanders had lived with these dangers since birth. They knew which plants healed fever, which leaves soothed wounds, which streams carried clean water. Their knowledge saved more men than medicine ever could. And yet, their role was dangerous. Many were captured by Japanese forces suspected of helping the Allies. Some were beaten, some killed, their villages burned as warnings. Still, others continued. Still, they carried supplies on their backs, marched beside soldiers, ferried wounded through rivers, hid downed pilots in caves until rescue came. They risked not only their lives, but their families, their homes, their future. Their war was one of sacrifice, quiet and unending. On Guadalcanal, the first great battle of the Pacific, islanders carried messages through jungles where radios failed. They moved faster than machines, slipping past enemy lines, delivering words that decided battles. Some carried ammunition, boxes heavier than their bodies, across mud that swallowed boots whole. Others carried wounded men, sometimes for days, through rain, through rivers, through exhaustion that broke even the strongest soldiers. They earned a name from those they saved, the angels of the jungle. But angels are rarely remembered. When the war ended, medals were scarce, recognition rarer still. Many islanders returned to their villages, to fishing and farming, as though nothing had happened. But scars remained, in the burned huts, in the graves by the shore, in the memories of nights when gunfire lit the sky instead of stars. Their children grew up with stories whispered in half-light, stories of fathers who carried strangers, of mothers who hid soldiers in their homes, of brothers who never returned from the forest. The islands themselves bore the wounds. Airstrips cut into fields, wrecked tanks rusting in rivers, sunken ships lying in shallow lagoons, their hulls blooming with coral, their guns silent beneath schools of fish. Nature began to reclaim the war, vines twisting around bunkers, trees growing through craters, birds nesting in the ruins of guns. But memory lingered, held in silence, carried in song. To walk these trails now is to feel the weight of footsteps that came before. To see the rivers is to know they carried not just water, but the wounded, the dead, the forgotten. To stand on the beaches is to remember that the calm sea once burned with fire, once carried ships filled with men who would never return. The islands are quiet again, but their silence is filled with echoes. Imagine a Micronesian boy, no older than 14, paddling his canoe through night waters. Stars guide him, waves speak to him, his hands steady on the paddle. In his canoe lies a message, coordinates, orders, hope that must reach the next island. Behind him, enemy patrols search the sea. Ahead of him, danger waits. But he paddles on because the war has made him its messenger. His name will not be written in books, but the lives saved by his journey will echo long after. Picture a woman in the Solomon Islands leading a wounded stranger through jungle paths. She holds his arm, whispers encouragement, feeds him food gathered from the forest. Her village may pay a price if she is caught, but she does not falter. To her, this man is simply another human in need, another soul to carry forward. Her act is not recorded, her courage not rewarded, but in that moment she changes the war. For the islanders, the war was not theirs. It came from the sea, from powers they did not know, for causes that meant little to them. Yet it scarred their lives, reshaped their futures. Roads cut through jungles where there had been only trails. New weapons and diseases spread. Old ways of life were disrupted, sometimes lost forever, and still their voices remain faint in the grand chorus of history. But listen closely and you can hear them. In the crash of waves on coral reefs, in the hum of insects under a hot sun, in the songs still sung in villages at dusk. Stories passed down, not written but spoken, carried like wind across generations. Stories of guides and carriers, of whisperers and healers, of the forgotten who became essential. The Pacific War is remembered for great fleets clashing, for marines storming beaches, for firebombs falling from the sky. But behind each of those moments stood the quiet strength of islanders, barefoot and unseen, carrying more than weight, carrying the survival of armies on their shoulders. Their war was not chosen, but it was theirs all the same. So tonight, as we drift into memory, hear the sound of surf against sand, the call of birds over jungle, the creak of canoes cutting through still water. Imagine yourself walking a narrow trail, mud sucking at your feet, rain falling in heavy sheets. Ahead of you, a wounded soldier leans on your shoulder, his life in your hands. Behind you, danger presses close. You keep walking because that is what must be done. You are not named, you are not celebrated, but without you, the war falters. The islands remember, the rivers, the reefs, the mountains, they hold the weight of those days. Forgotten soldiers, forgotten guides, forgotten villages, their footprints washed away but never erased. And though history may pass them by, the Pacific itself carries their stories, carved in silence, carried in song, waiting for us to listen. The story of World War II is told through generals and armies, through tanks grinding across plains and bombers filling the sky. But beneath that thunder were other footsteps, quiet, often unseen, sometimes erased. The women of the war, they stood at the edge of memory, healers, fighters, victims, survivors. Their courage burned softly like lanterns in darkness, their suffering marked by silence, and their stories scattered across continents wait still to be heard. Imagine the cold deck of a hospital ship rocking in black waters. The sky is a quilt of stars, the sea endless. Below, the cries of men broken by shells and fire. Nurses in white uniforms move quickly, their hands steady, their faces pale under lantern light. They dress wounds, stitch torn flesh, whisper comfort to men far from home. Their ship is unarmed, yet it sails through seas hunted by submarines. At any moment, a torpedo could send them all to the bottom. They know this, and still they walk the wards carrying hope in their hands. Think of a French woman in Paris, hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes sharp with quiet defiance. She passes through crowded streets, a loaf of bread tucked under her arm. Inside the bread is a message, names, times, secrets that could decide who lives and who dies tonight. She slips into a cellar lit by a single candle. Around her, men whisper plans, guns laid across tables. She is not just a courier, she is a fighter. She has chosen a war in the shadows, where betrayal could come with a knock at the door, where torture waits in the prisons of the Gestapo. Still she walks those streets. Still she carries the weight of freedom hidden in her hands. On the frozen plains of the Soviet Union, winter burns sharper than fire. The snow is deep, the nights endless. A woman lies prone, her breath fogging against the scope of her rifle. She waits. Hours pass, snow covering her shoulders until she looks like part of the earth itself. Then the shot. Silent, precise, final. She was once a student, a daughter, perhaps a mother. Now she is a sniper, one of thousands of Soviet women who picked up rifles to defend their homeland. They fought not from the rear but from the front. They crawled through snow, slept in trenches, bled in battles that devoured entire armies. Their names are scarce in the histories, but their trigger fingers changed the course of war. Not all women were given the dignity of choice. Across Asia, tens of thousands were seized, forced into the unthinkable. They became comfort women, a word that hides more than it tells. Girls taken from Korea, from China, from the Philippines, dragged into stations where their bodies became battlefields. They endured violence in silence, their cries swallowed by shame. When the war ended, many returned home broken, shunned, unable to speak. Their wounds did not heal with treaties, their war never ended. Their memory remains the most fragile, the most forgotten, yet perhaps the most necessary to keep alive. The war stretched across every continent, and with it, so did the weight carried by women. In Britain, women of the Women's Land Army dug fields, planted crops, milked cows, keeping the nation fed while men fought abroad. Their hands blistered on plows, their backs bent over soil, their work unseen by parades but essential to survival. In factories from Detroit to Moscow, women stood at assembly lines, welding steel, riveting wings, hammering bolts. The thunder of machines drowned out their voices, but every tank, every plane carried a trace of their sweat. In China, women carried supplies across mountains, their bodies bent beneath loads heavier than themselves. They walked beside caravans of mules through mud, rain, and hunger, keeping armies alive. In Greece, women joined partisans in the mountains, carrying rifles, planting bombs, fighting in skirmishes against occupation. In the Philippines, women carried secret messages sewn into clothing, smuggled food to prisoners, hid guerrilla fighters in their homes. Everywhere, in ways small and vast, they became the spine of resistance. And yet, when the war ended, many were asked to step back into silence, to return to kitchens, to farms, to roles that hid their courage. Medals were rare, recognition rarer still. Their stories remained in whispers, told in kitchens, passed between generations like secrets too fragile for the open air. History recorded the generals, the speeches, the victories. It forgot the women who stitched wounds in flickering light, who waited in frozen trenches, who endured the unendurable in silence. But memory has a way of returning. Slowly, carefully, their stories resurface. A Soviet sniper named Lyudmila, who killed more than 300 enemies before illness pulled her from the front. A French courier named Lucy, who smuggled messages across checkpoints, saving countless lives. A nurse named Agnes, who sailed on convoys through U-boat waters, comforting the dying while waiting for death herself. A Korean girl named Kim, her life stolen in a brothel, who decades later found the strength to speak, demanding that the world finally hear. Each is only one name among thousands, but together they form a chorus once silenced. Their courage burned quietly, but no less bright. In the darkness of hospital wards, in the chill of ruined cities, in the silence of jungle trails, women became the pulse of survival. They carried life where death reigned. They fought battles that will never appear on maps, endured losses that left no monuments. Their memory lingers at the edge, waiting for us to listen. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine their hands. A nurse's hand steady on a fevered brow, a fighter's hand slipping a note across a checkpoint, a sniper's hand tightening on a frozen trigger, a survivor's hand trembling as she holds her silence. These hands shaped the war, these hands carried history forward. Even if the world forgot their names, the weight of what they carried still presses on us all. So listen, as the echoes return, the voices of women at the edge of memory, no longer silent, no longer unseen. They remind us that courage wears many faces, and that history, though often written in iron and fire, is also stitched quietly in cloth, whispered in dark alleys, carried in the steady rhythm of hands that heal, guide, and endure. Their war was fought in shadows, but their light endures, and tonight that light leads us into remembrance. Barbed wire stretches across the horizon, rusted metal twisting under snow, under sun, under rain. Behind it, rows of shadows move slowly, bent at the waist, shoulders hunched with hunger. They are soldiers, but their rifles are gone, their uniforms tattered, their names already slipping into silence. They are prisoners of war, scattered across continents, caught between battles, forgotten by the nations that once called them brothers. They fought hunger more than captors, time more than enemies, memory more than death. Imagine the silence of an Italian prison camp. Indian soldiers sit in rows, their eyes hollow, their bodies gaunt. They once marched beneath the burning sun of North Africa, carrying the empire's banner, sweating in the desert heat. But now, far from home, they kneel in dust, clutching tin bowls half filled with watery soup. Rats scurry near their feet, guards watch from towers, and each night the same question haunts them. Will they live long enough to see home again? Their mothers, their wives, their children wait oceans away, unaware that the men they love are already fading. In the frozen expanse of Siberia, camps sprawl like scars across the snow. Prisoners from across the war march through drifts with chains of frost around their beards, boots falling apart, fingers black with frostbite. Some are captured soldiers, some civilians taken by suspicion, all swallowed by the gulags. Hunger gnaws at them like wolves. They dream of bread, of warmth, of a bed that does not shiver with cold. Each day blends into the next. Each night the silence deepens, broken only by coughs that never end. Here men vanish not by bullets but by time, their bodies laid beneath frozen earth, their names erased as though they never lived. Across Asia, African conscripts who once carried rifles now carry emptiness in their bellies. Captured in jungles, marched across lands not their own, they are penned into makeshift camps of bamboo and mud. Food is scarce, water fouled. Disease spreads faster than whispers, malaria, dysentery, cholera. They watch comrades collapse, lifted not by medics but by silence. Their captors keep records, but the world will not. Their names slip away, their stories untold, their graves unmarked. In every camp, one battle was the same. The battle against hunger. Bread became more valuable than gold. A scrap of potato could mean survival. Men bartered buttons, shoes, memories for a mouthful of food. They boiled weeds into soup, chewed leather belts, gnawed wood when nothing else remained. Their stomachs shrank, their bodies hollowed, their eyes sunk deep into skulls. Hunger was the greatest captor, the cruelest jailer, the enemy that claimed more lives than bullets. Some clung to hope through memory. They whispered songs from their homelands, songs of rivers, of harvests, of children's laughter. They told stories in the dark, stories of weddings, of festivals, of the smell of spices cooking in kitchens far away. In the telling, for a moment, they were not prisoners. For a moment, they were human again, but the moment always ended, and dawn always came, and with it, another day of hunger. Others fought to keep dignity. They carved names into wood, scratched prayers into walls, etched marks on stones to count days that never seemed to end. They passed scraps of paper hand to hand, writing letters that would never be delivered. They remembered comrades already gone, refusing to let their names vanish. They created memory as resistance, fragile but unyielding. Yet many faded even before death, their bodies present but their identities erased. Guards called them by numbers, not names. Records labeled them as unknown. Letters home were returned unopened. Families searched for them after the war, but no answers came. They were swallowed by silence, ghosts while still breathing. To the world outside the wire, they had already died. There were escapes, desperate and few, men who tunneled beneath fences, who slipped into forests under cover of night, who risked wolves and bullets for a chance at freedom. Some made it, some vanished, their bones left in snowdrifts or rivers. For those who survived, the scars never faded. Their bodies carried the hunger, their minds carried the barbed wire. Long after the war, they woke at night hearing the clatter of boots, the rattle of chains, the hollow echo of empty bowls. The world remembers battles, victories, defeats, but prisoners rarely earn remembrance. Their suffering is too quiet, too shameful, too easily ignored. Nations prefer stories of glory, not of men broken behind wire. But without their endurance, without their silence, the war's shadow cannot be understood. They bore its cruelty in the most stripped-down form, where survival was not about medals or victories, but about the next breath, the next crumb, the next dawn. Some were liberated, stumbling into sunlight when the wire was finally cut. They walked like skeletons, their eyes too large, their steps too fragile. Some wept, some fell silent, unable to believe the war had truly ended. They returned home to families who barely recognized them, to lives that had moved on without them, to societies that did not want to hear what they had endured. They carried their prisons inside them, invisible but eternal. Others never saw freedom. They were buried in unmarked graves, in forests, in deserts, in fields, their names forgotten, their families left with silence. Their stories live only in fragments, an entry in a ledger, a rumor in a village, a scar in the memory of survivors. They became the truly forgotten, fading before death claimed them. But if we listen closely, we can still hear them, in the sound of wind rattling old fences, in the silence of fields where camps once stood, in the hollow hunger that lingers in the memories of those who survived. Their ghosts still walk, not to frighten, but to remind us. That war is not just fire and thunder. It is also the slow erosion of bodies and souls behind wire, hidden from view, erased from memory. Imagine now one prisoner, an Indian soldier in an Italian camp. He writes a letter on a scrap of cloth, his words shaky, his hope thin. He tells his wife he is alive, though his ribs show like bones of a bird. He tells his children he dreams of holding them again. He folds the cloth, hides it in his clothes, prays it might somehow find its way home, but it never does. Decades later, his descendants search archives, but the trail ends at silence. He faded long before his body died. Or an African conscript in Asia, shivering with fever under a bamboo roof. He remembers the songs of his village, the sound of drums at night, the warmth of fires by the river. He hums softly, his voice thin as wind. Around him, others sleep or starve, but for a moment his song fills the dark. Then his eyes close and he joins the silence. No monument carries his name, no book tells his story, but his song once rose in the night, and it mattered. Or a Russian prisoner in Siberia, frost clinging to his beard. He carves a name into wood, not his own, but that of a comrade already gone. He sets the carving beneath the snow, hoping someday someone might find it. The wood rots, the snow melts, the name is lost. But for that moment in his frozen hands, memory resisted. These men, these prisoners were not erased completely. For in speaking of them, in remembering their silence, we bring them back to light. They faded in life, but in memory they return. They stand again behind the wire, waiting for us to see them, not as numbers, not as ghosts, but as human beings who endured the darkest corners of war. So tonight, let us walk with them, through the camps of dust and snow, through hunger that never ended, through silence that buried them before death. Let us carry their memory so they do not fade again. For the war may have forgotten them, history may have erased them, but memory once spoken can make them live once more. Streets once filled with laughter lie in rubble, stones blackened by fire, windows shattered, their frames staring blank into a gray sky, and yet beneath these ruins life stirs. In cellars, in tunnels, in narrow alleys where light barely falls. The war was not only fought on open fields, not only with tanks and planes. In occupied cities, the battlefield was silence itself, broken by whispers, by footsteps in the dark, by songs that refused to die. Warsaw, Manila, Rotterdam, Nanking, cities crushed by invasion, burned, shelled, scarred, their people became shadows moving among ruins. To survive was itself defiance. To resist, even in small ways, was rebellion sharper than steel. They smuggled food under coats, carried news folded in shoes, sang songs that spoke of freedom though their voices trembled. Each act was dangerous, each act a spark against overwhelming darkness. Imagine a mother in Warsaw, her home reduced to ash, her children hungry. She kneels in a cellar, pressing bread into their hands. That bread was smuggled, carried past checkpoints, hidden beneath her skirt. If the soldiers had searched her, she would have been beaten, perhaps shot. But hunger leaves no choice. Her courage is not marked by guns, but by the crumbs she risks her life to deliver. Picture a young boy in Manila darting through alleys carrying a folded paper. It is not a toy, but a message. Orders, perhaps, or warnings written in hurried script. He slips it beneath a stone at the edge of the street, then vanishes into the crowd. The message will be picked up, carried further, passed hand to hand, until it reaches those who wait in the jungle. He does not think of himself as a soldier, but his small steps change the course of battles unseen. In Rotterdam, resistance fighters gather in attics, their voices low. They print leaflets on hidden presses, words sharp as blades, words that the occupiers fear more than rifles. At night they paste them on walls, slip them under doors. By morning the city whispers with hope, and though the enemy tears them down, burns them, punishes those who read, still the words return. Ink and paper become weapons, silence itself becomes defiance. And in Nanking, where the scars of massacre run deep, survival itself is a kind of rebellion. Families hide together, sharing scraps of food, shielding children from patrols that prowl the streets. Some whisper prayers, others sing songs too soft to carry beyond the walls. Those songs, fragile as breath, are not meant to be heard by soldiers. They are meant to remind the living that they are still human, still alive, still together in the ruins. Everywhere, songs rose beneath rubble. Band hymns sung in whispers, lullabies hummed to children who cried in fear, folk melodies carried like torches in the dark. To sing was to declare existence, to remember a world before fire, to promise that one day the streets would echo with music again. These songs, though never recorded, were sharper than any weapon. They pierced despair. They carried courage where none seemed possible. The occupiers feared these voices. They banned gatherings, censored music, arrested singers. They knew that even whispers could grow into storms, yet whispers spread faster than fire. One verse, sung quietly in a cellar, could carry across a city, passed from mother to daughter, father to son. A song could unite those who had never met, bind them in resistance, keep hope alive when all else seemed lost. But the cost was heavy. Those caught smuggling food, carrying notes, singing forbidden songs. Many were imprisoned, tortured, executed. Their courage ended not with medals, but with silence. Graves dug hurriedly, names erased, families left to mourn in secret. Yet their acts, though punished, could not be undone. Once a song is sung, once a whisper is carried, it cannot be taken back. Its echo remains, even if the singer does not. Children grew up in this world of whispers. They learned to stay silent when soldiers passed, to keep secrets they barely understood. They watched their parents risk everything for scraps of food, for scraps of truth. Their childhood was rubble, but also resistance. They too carried the songs, the stories, the courage of those nights beneath ruins. Imagine now the sound of footsteps on broken stone, a curfewed city, silent but for patrols, then faintly from a cellar, a song. Soft, trembling but steady. It carries through cracks in the earth, through ruins, into the hearts of those listening in silence. For a moment, they are not prisoners of occupation. They are people still alive, still unbroken. For a moment, hope survives. And so the war in the cities was not only fire and destruction. It was survival. It was smuggling and secrecy, ink and whispers, lullabies and hymns. It was the courage of those who had no rifles, no armies, but who still fought. Their battleground was the ruins. Their weapon was defiance. Their legacy is the memory that even in the darkest night, voices can rise, fragile but unyielding, songs beneath ruins that refuse to fade. Engines rumble against the wind, fragile frames of metal shuddering as they cut through the air. The war was not only fought on the ground, not only in trenches or on seas, but in the skies above the world. Forgotten skies, where pilots from Ethiopia, from China, from Mexico, from Poland, lifted their machines into battles that were barely recorded, their names scattered like clouds, their stories vanishing with the contrails they left behind. Imagine an Ethiopian pilot in the early days of resistance, straining against the controls of an aircraft already too old when the war began. His enemy flew machines built with the newest steel, engines fine-tuned, weapons precise. His plane rattled, groaned, seemed ready to fall apart with every turn, and yet he climbed into the sky because the ground below was his home, and if he did not rise to fight, no one else would. His victory, should he have one, was never written in bold headlines. His fall, should he crash, would leave only smoke on a hillside, swallowed by the earth. Think of the Chinese pilots, their skies filled with foreign bombers and their cities turned to ash. They flew aircraft sent from allies, hand-me-down machines that coughed black smoke with every climb. Still, they rose. Some never returned, their bodies lost in mountains or swallowed by rivers. Some fought in skies so clouded by smoke that the horizon disappeared, where each dive was a gamble between striking the enemy or vanishing into the fog forever. Their courage was not remembered in parades or statues. It was carried only by those who saw them vanish into the storm and did not see them return. In Mexico, young men trained far from the burning front lines, then sent across oceans to fly under another flag. Their squadron was small, almost invisible in the vastness of the war, but they carried with them pride that could not be erased. They flew missions others thought minor, escorting, guarding, delivering fire into places unknown. To history, they are a footnote, but in their cockpits, high above seas and jungles, they were warriors staring down death with every heartbeat. They looked down on worlds they had never known, cities and islands they would never see again once their mission ended. And Poland, a nation crushed, occupied, scattered. Yet its pilots refused to vanish. They found themselves in foreign squadrons, under British skies, their uniforms mismatched, their accents thick. They flew with ferocity, for they had no home to return to, only the burning memory of one. Their dogfights were desperate, their victories among the most fierce. Yet when peace returned, many were exiled, their names unspoken in the very lands they defended. Their reward was silence, their glory hidden, their graves far from the soil of Poland itself. All of them shared a sky that did not belong to them. They flew under borrowed flags, in borrowed machines, their victories claimed by nations that barely remembered their faces. If they fell, the wreckage was often unmarked, buried by waves, lost in jungles, consumed by snow. If they lived, their stories were reduced to lines in forgotten reports, overshadowed by the legends of others. Up there, above burning cities and broken fields, the sky was endless but merciless. There was no shelter, no escape. A single burst of fire could end everything. The cockpit was a fragile shell, the glass vibrating with each shot, the wings trembling with each dive. The pilots felt both the freedom of flight and the certainty of death pressing against them. Some prayed as they climbed, some laughed into the wind, some carried photographs folded in their pockets of mothers, of lovers, of homes that might no longer exist. And when they fell, the earth swallowed them quickly. A crash in a forest, flames in the desert, metal sinking into the sea. The world below kept moving, battles raging, armies marching. Few stopped to mark where the pilots fell. Few remembered their names. Only the sky itself carried their memory, the trails of smoke dissolving into clouds, the echoes of engines fading into silence. Yet in those fleeting moments, when wings cut across dawn or dusk, when the horizon glowed and the engine roared like thunder, they were not forgotten men. They were warriors touching eternity, their courage burning as bright as the sun breaking through storm clouds. Their war may have been erased from history's pages, but it remains written in the vast canvas above, where each whisper of wind, each streak of light, still carries the ghosts of their flight. The forgotten skies are full of them still. Pilots from Ethiopia, from China, from Mexico, from Poland. Young men who risked everything, who rose into storms with nothing but fragile machines and unshakable hearts. They looked down on burning cities, on oceans churning with war, on mountains scarred with fire. And though their victories were unrecorded, though their crashes were unmarked, the sky remembers. It always remembers. Mountains rise like jagged teeth against the sky, their slopes veiled with mist, their valleys scarred by fire. In these places, the war was not fought by armies of thousands in polished uniforms, but by shepherds, by peasants, by villagers who knew the hidden trails better than any map could tell. Their rifles were old, their bombs homemade, their courage a fire that could not be extinguished. These were the partisans of the mountains, men and women who chose to fight when the world around them demanded silence, who carved resistance into the rocks and forests of their homelands. In Greece, a shepherd traded his crook for a rifle. He knew the ridges better than any invader could ever learn, the goat paths that twisted like veins across the cliffs. From those high places, he watched columns of enemy soldiers march through the valleys below, boots pounding in rhythm, banners of conquest trailing behind. At night, he and his comrades struck, ambushes that shattered silence, gunfire echoing through canyons, explosions tearing at bridges and rail lines. Then they vanished, swallowed by the stones and pines. The invaders called them ghosts, shadows that bled them dry. To their villages, they were guardians, though the reprisals they provoked were merciless. For every attack, entire hamlets were burned, entire families executed. Yet still the shepherds fought, because surrender meant a death slower than bullets. In Yugoslavia, peasants armed with little more than dynamite and stolen rifles waged a war of smoke and ash. They had no uniforms, only patched clothes and hunger in their bellies. They lived in forests, in caves dripping with water, in huts that could collapse under snow. They carried dynamite stolen from mines, blasting trains from their rails, tearing apart supply lines that fed enemy armies. Every detonation was both victory and curse, for retaliation followed swiftly. Still they returned again and again, lighting fuses with trembling hands, scattering into the hills as the fire spread. The mountains became both home and battlefield, offering shelter and swallowing the dead alike. In Italy, rebels struck from hidden caves, men and women who once tilled vineyards or tended markets now carrying pistols in the folds of their jackets. They struck quickly. Assassinations in alleys, sabotage on mountain roads. Their voices carried in whispers, encoded songs, in signals passed between villages. The caves became sanctuaries where they shared meager bread, where they buried their dead in silence, where hope flickered like the light of a candle against stone walls. For them, resistance was not only against an enemy in black boots, but against despair itself, the slow erosion of dignity under occupation. Women fought alongside men, often unnoticed, their weapons not always rifles, but their knowledge, their courage, their silence under interrogation. They carried messages sewn into hems, medicines hidden in baskets, dynamite beneath loaves of bread. They nursed the wounded in mountain huts, gathered intelligence in occupied towns, sometimes pulling the trigger themselves. When captured, their names rarely survived the torture that followed. Yet their legacy clings to the wind in those mountains, as if their voices still linger among the peaks. The partisans lived with hunger as a constant companion. Food was scarce, bread hard, water drawn from streams that froze in winter. Clothes rotted from damp, boots wore through on the sharp stones. Illness spread unchecked, but there was no choice but to endure. For in the valleys below, collaborators and occupiers alike hunted them. Every villager was a potential betrayer, every stranger a possible spy. And yet entire villages also fed them, sheltered them, risked everything to keep their struggle alive. Resistance was born not only of defiance, but of the bond between those who could not bear to see their lands enslaved. Their victories were rarely grand. A derailed train, a convoy ambushed in a narrow pass, a bridge reduced to rubble, a garrison harassed until it feared the night. Each act slowed the advance, weakened the occupiers, kept alive the idea that freedom was not dead. Yet those who fought often received no thanks when the war ended. Governments returned, but instead of honor, many partisans met suspicion. Some were disarmed, dismissed, accused of disloyalty. Their sacrifices buried beneath politics, their graves left unmarked. They had bled for lands that would not remember them. But in the mountains themselves, their memory endures. Each ruined outpost, each scarred tree, each hidden cave whispers of them. The peaks that once sheltered them now stand as silent witnesses. In Greece, the songs of shepherds still echo, carrying fragments of their names. In Yugoslavia, rivers still rush past the places where dynamite once shattered bridges. In Italy, vineyards once again bear fruit, but beneath their roots lie the bones of those who fought in shadows. At night, when the wind runs across ridges and valleys, it seems to carry their footsteps. Men and women moving quickly through the dark, rifles slung across backs, dynamite clutched tight. Their breath heavy in the cold, their hearts steady with purpose. They were ordinary people who became extraordinary not through power or rank, but through the simple refusal to submit. In their defiance, they became immortal, though the world may not speak their names. The partisans of the mountains lived and died in obscurity. Their stories scattered, half-remembered, blurred between myth and truth. Some became symbols, celebrated in songs. Most faded into silence, their graves hidden in forests, their families left with only questions. They were betrayed not only by enemies but by time itself. Yet still their spirit lingers in every cliff, every ravine, every ruined stone wall. For when we look to the mountains, when we hear the wind whisper through their passes, we might imagine the shepherd with his rifle, the peasant with his dynamite, the woman with her secret message. We might remember that freedom is often defended not by armies in bright banners, but by shadows who move unseen, by footsteps lost among ruins and rivers. And though history may forget their names, the mountains never will. Their war was written not on parchment or stone, but on soil and snow, on the smoke of burning villages, on the echoes of gunfire between cliffs. It was a war of desperation, of courage, of sacrifice, of betrayal. A war carried on by those who had nothing left but the will to fight. The partisans of the mountains, forgotten by many, remain etched into the very landscapes they once bled to defend. Their legacy rises with the peaks, enduring as long as the earth itself. Far from the grand strategies and battle maps, in fields and ports and jungles, millions of hands worked in silence. Over 2 million Africans, Indians, and Southeast Asians were pulled into the war, not as celebrated soldiers, not as men of medals and parades, but as laborers, conscripts, carriers of burdens no history book cared to list. For every rifle fired at the front, 100 hands lifted boxes of ammunition. For every trench filled with soldiers, there were others who had dug it, sweating under foreign suns, far from their homes. In Africa, men marched under the lash of colonial officers, their bare feet pounding roads carved through wilderness. They carried stretchers heavy with the wounded, their shoulders aching, their backs bent. Some dragged artillery through mud, their bodies harnessed like animals to machines they did not understand. Disease claimed more than bullets did. Malaria, dysentery, hunger. Silent enemies that struck down thousands. Yet still they marched, because orders left no room for refusal. In India, laborers hauled supplies across deserts and jungles. They built airstrips from dust and stone, repaired railways under the watchful eyes of officers who rarely learned their names. For them, war meant endless hours of lifting, digging, carrying, their sweat soaking the earth. They were promised pay, promised food, sometimes promised freedom. Most received little. Many returned to villages that barely recognized their suffering, where their scars and exhaustion were dismissed as the natural toll of poverty. In Burma's jungles, Southeast Asians hacked through thick green walls with machetes, opening paths for armies to advance. They hauled wounded men on bamboo stretchers, their feet sinking into swamps, their bodies torn by leeches. Some guided columns through the forests, their knowledge of rivers and trails the only lifeline for foreign troops. They rarely carried rifles, yet they bore the weight of war all the same. Their reward was silence, their names erased, their lives folded back into obscurity when the guns quieted. The empires that conscripted them called them auxiliaries, porters, coolies, words that stripped them of identity, reducing lives to categories of labor. They were not listed in victory rolls, not remembered in monuments. Yet without them, armies could not have moved, supplies could not have reached the front, battles could not have been fought. Their invisible work was the scaffolding upon which the war was built, though no one cared to write their stories. Some resisted. Some fled into forests, deserts, mountains to escape conscription. Punishments were brutal. Families were threatened, villages burned, rebels hunted. For many, there was no choice but to obey. War came to their lands not as a call to defend freedom, but as chains pulling them into battles they did not choose. And yet in their labor, there was resilience. Songs rose from the camps, chants to keep rhythm while lifting stones, stories whispered under starlight to remind each other of home. These small acts of humanity became their weapons, their way of resisting the erasure that surrounded them. For though history forgot their voices, in the moment they endured, they lived with courage as great as any soldier at the front. When the war ended, few parades waited for them. Their service dissolved into silence. Monuments were raised for generals and statesmen, medals pinned on decorated veterans. For the laborers, there was little more than dismissal. Some never returned at all, their bodies left in foreign soil, unmarked, unnamed. Their families were told nothing, or were left with rumors, with the emptiness of absence. Today, their memory lingers faintly in oral tales passed down in villages, in faded photographs, in the stories of grandfathers who spoke only rarely of what they endured. They are the forgotten millions, men who built the victories of empires and received nothing but silence in return. As we walk through the pages of history, we must remember that for every battle fought, there were hands unseen that made it possible. For every soldier remembered, there were dozens whose names are lost in the dust. The Africans, the Indians, the Southeast Asians, laborers who bent their backs for a war not their own. They were the foundation beneath the armies, the shadows behind the victories. And though history may have chosen to forget them, the earth they walked upon still remembers. Their sweat darkened the soil. Their voices once rose in songs against exhaustion. Their footsteps carried armies across continents. They were invisible to the empires that used them, but they remain etched in the silence that follows war. Forgotten in the colonies, yet forever a part of the story the world continues to tell, even if only in whispers. Beneath the surface of oceans, where light fades and silence reigns, another war unfolded. A war fought not on open fields or crowded skies, but in steel tubes that groaned under pressure, hidden from the world above. Submariners from nations barely known, men whose stories were drowned with them, carried their battles into the deep. Dutch crews in exile, Norwegian hunters prowling icy waters, Chinese sailors braving seas that seemed endless. Each entered a world where survival was measured in breaths of recycled air, where one wrong move meant the ocean itself became their grave. The Dutch, driven from their homeland after occupation, sailed under foreign flags yet carried the memory of their lost harbors. Their submarines slipped quietly through enemy lanes, hunting ships that supplied the invader who had taken everything from them. Every patrol was an act of defiance. Every torpedo launched a reminder that their nation lived on, even beneath the waves. Yet their victories rarely reached the newspapers. Their losses, when they came, were final and silent, ships failing to return to ports far from home. Families waited, but the sea does not give back what it claims. The Norwegians knew those same frozen seas, their hunters moving through waters where ice floated like jagged blades. They faced storms that could break even the strongest vessel, yet they pressed on, chasing enemies across coasts their occupiers thought secure. Their periscopes rose among the waves like watchful eyes, striking fear where none expected. But each mission was a gamble. Depth charges rolled from enemy decks, the water above roaring with explosions, while inside, crews clung to silence, praying the hull would hold. To live another day meant only to return and dive again. In the Pacific, Chinese submariners braved vast waters against impossible odds. Their ships were outdated, their training rushed, their enemy relentless. Yet they sailed anyway, carrying torpedoes into seas ruled by fleets far larger than their own. The ocean became their battleground, the depths both shield and trap. Many never returned, their steel coffins settling onto the seabed, forgotten by the world, remembered only by the families who never saw them again. Life aboard these vessels was its own kind of war. Cramped bunks shared between shifts, air growing foul with each passing hour, engines thundering like a heartbeat through metal walls. Sweat dripped in tropical patrols, frost formed in northern waters. Meals were little more than rationed bread, canned meat, bitter coffee. Sleep came in snatches, broken by alarms, by the sudden rush to dive, by the metallic clang of hatches sealing shut. To serve beneath the waves was to accept a life lived between darkness and pressure, a life where death waited at every depth. And when death came, it was swift, merciless, and complete. A torpedo striking home, an explosion tearing through steel, a hull buckling under the weight of the sea. There was no escape, no surrender. One moment of light, one instant of terror, then silence and the ocean closing in. Entire crews vanished in seconds, their final resting places marked only by coordinates on a map. Families received no bodies, only official words, and even those often came late, or not at all. The submariners knew this. They lived with it every time the hatch closed above them. They wrote letters before they sailed, sometimes never mailed, folded into lockers left behind. They carved small marks on steel walls, prayed over photographs tucked into pockets. They laughed too, when they could, because laughter was a defiance stronger than fear. In those tight corridors, brotherhood was forged, bonds so close that each man's life rested in the hands of the others. But history gave them little space. Their stories drowned along with their vessels. The great battles of the war were told in terms of armies and generals, of tanks and planes. Submariners remained shadows, spoken of only when ships sank or when losses were too great to hide. Yet without them, supply lines would not have broken, invasions would not have slowed, enemies would not have feared the seas. Their hidden war shaped the tides, even if it remained unseen. Today their graves lie scattered across oceans. Rusting hulls crumbling in silence, coral weaving through broken steel, fish swimming through compartments where men once breathed. The sea keeps them, a quiet memorial invisible from the surface. Only sonar, only divers, only the rare discovery of a wreck recalls their presence. Their sacrifice is buried deep, out of sight, but not out of meaning. When the wind rushes over the sea, when waves crash against rocky shores, we might imagine their voices carried upward. The Dutch sailor who longed for a homeland he could not see. The Norwegian hunter watching icy spray coat the periscope glass. The Chinese crewman listening for the faint ping of sonar, knowing it meant death drew close. Their echoes rise with the tide, though the world has forgotten their names. For most, the war beneath the waves ended without recognition. No medals pinned on their uniforms, no monuments raised on their behalf. Their silence was the silence of history itself, which too often forgets those who fight in shadows. Yet they remain there in the deep, in the steel and water, in the darkness and pressure. Their ships sealed forever, their courage written in the endless blue that swallowed them. In the shadow of battlefields where gunfire echoed and the wounded cried out, another kind of war was fought, not with rifles or tanks, but with bandages, with bare hands, with whatever scraps of medicine could be found. These were the forgotten healers, doctors without medicine, medics without morphine, stretcher-bearers without weapons. They did not march to conquer, but to preserve. They did not fight for victory, but for one more breath, one more heartbeat, one more chance at survival. In the deserts of North Africa, African orderlies trudged behind columns of soldiers, their arms cradling the wounded. They had no rifles to protect themselves, only stretchers that weighed heavy in the heat. Flies swarmed, dust burned their throats, and yet they carried on, pulling men out of shell holes, dragging them to shade, fanning life into lungs that struggled to breathe. Their courage was quiet, but it was unshakable. For every soldier who fell, they ran toward danger, not away. History recorded the battles, the tanks, the generals, but rarely the men who risked their lives to lift the fallen from the sand. In the Philippines, as Japanese troops advanced, Filipino nurses worked in hospitals stripped bare. Supplies dwindled to nothing, morphine gone, antibiotics never arriving. They tore sheets into bandages, boiled water to clean wounds, whispered words of comfort when no cure could be offered. Bombs shook the walls around them, yet they stayed at their posts, hands steady even as fear churned inside. Many were captured, some forced into service, some executed when they refused to abandon their patients. Their names were whispered in villages, but the world moved on without remembering. Their service was not sung, but their compassion burned brightly against the darkness. In Europe's ghettos, Jewish doctors fought a different kind of war. With starvation all around them, with epidemics sweeping through crowded streets, they turned basements into clinics, cupboards into pharmacies, scraps into instruments. They knew there was little hope that the walls would one day close in, yet they continued to heal, to comfort, to resist despair with every stitch, every whispered prayer. They wrote down their findings, recorded the toll of hunger and disease, knowing the world outside might never read their words. For them, healing became an act of defiance, a declaration that even in a world built on cruelty, compassion would not be extinguished. Stretcher-bearers walked the line between life and death with every step. They crawled through gunfire to reach the fallen, bent under the weight of bodies that bled across their shoulders. They were unarmed, yet they moved through battles more dangerous than most soldiers ever dared. Their reward was often to fall alongside those they tried to save, cut down before they could carry their burden back to safety. Yet others replaced them, lifting the stretchers, carrying on. Their names are rarely carved into monuments, though without them, few would have survived the front lines at all. The healers lived with impossible choices. One bandage, 2 wounded, 1 vial of morphine, 3 men screaming in pain. They became arbiters of who would live and who would die, and they carried those decisions long after the fighting stopped. Their own wounds went untreated, their own exhaustion ignored, their own grief hidden behind the duty to serve others. To heal in war was to give without expectation of thanks, to sacrifice knowing memory might never follow. And yet, they found strength in their humanity. A nurse humming softly as she cleaned a wound. An orderly holding the hand of a dying man who would not see the dawn. A doctor scribbling notes in the dark, determined to leave some record, some trace of care in a world that had forgotten kindness. These acts were small, fleeting, yet they carried the weight of eternity. For in the midst of destruction, they chose to create moments of life. When the war ended, few were honored. Medals rarely went to those who carried stretchers or boiled bandages. Monuments rose to generals, to battles, to soldiers. The healers faded back into silence, their work absorbed into the great tide of memory that washed over the world. Many did not survive at all, their graves unmarked, their stories untold. But the lives they touched carried traces of them forward. A soldier who returned home because an orderly pulled him from the sand. A child who lived because a nurse found food when none was left. A ghetto survivor who remembered the quiet courage of doctors who refused to stop caring. These memories lived on, scattered and fragile, yet real. The forgotten healers saved lives in places where death ruled, and though history rarely marks their names, their legacy is woven into the survival of millions. They remind us that war is not only destruction, but also the struggle to preserve what little light can be kept alive. In every battlefield, in every camp, in every ghetto, there were hands that healed, voices that comforted, hearts that refused to surrender compassion. And so, though their names are lost to disease and shellfire, their spirit lingers. It lingers in every hospital ward, in every medic's satchel, in every whispered promise to save one more life. Their compassion was unrecorded, but it was not in vain, for in the darkest hours of war they carried humanity on their shoulders, and that is a victory no silence can erase. The guns stopped, the smoke lifted. Across the ruins of cities and the broken fields of battle, silence came, but it was not peace. It was the stillness of exhaustion, the hush of a world that had bled too long. In capitals across the globe, parades marched, flags were raised, and anthems echoed through streets still scarred by rubble. Victors proclaimed triumph. Governments promised a new age. Yet beneath the cheering crowds, millions slipped quietly away into shadows, their sacrifices uncounted, their stories unspoken. For many, 1945 was not an ending but a return to invisibility. Veterans from far-off colonies, the men from Africa, from India, from the Caribbean, from Southeast Asia, found themselves unwelcome in the victory they had helped to build. They had marched across deserts, fought in jungles, carried stretchers through gunfire, steered ships across frozen seas. They had given blood, breath, and years of their lives. Yet when the flags unfurled and the leaders spoke of freedom, those who had fought under foreign banners returned home to silence, denied pensions, denied respect, denied even the acknowledgement that their war had been fought. In small villages across the Gold Coast, returning soldiers wore their tattered uniforms, medals pinned to their chests, only to be told that their service was worth less than the men who had fought beside them in Europe. Promises of land, of wages, of dignity were erased with the stroke of a pen. The empire they had bled for had no place for them in its triumph. Many slipped back into poverty, carrying scars that no one cared to see. In India, men who had marched across Burma and North Africa returned to a country already moving toward independence. Their sacrifices became bargaining chips in political debates, not stories to be remembered. They were dismissed from barracks, told to fade back into fields, to become laborers once more. The rifles they had carried were gone, the discipline forgotten. What remained were memories of jungles, of comrades who never returned, of orders barked in languages not their own. They had fought for an empire crumbling before their eyes, and in its collapse, their voices were lost. In the Caribbean, sailors and dock workers who had watched for submarines found no recognition in the aftermath. Their islands remained poor, their futures uncertain. The war they had helped to win had passed them by, leaving behind only sunken ships and empty promises. For them, victory was a distant echo, drowned out by the waves against the shore. Even in the heart of Europe, countless veterans found themselves forgotten. Resistance fighters who had risked everything in forests and mountains returned to homes destroyed, to governments suspicious of their loyalties. Some were branded traitors, others were imprisoned by new regimes. The medals given to them were meaningless when paired with suspicion, exile, or silence. They had fought for freedom, only to see it twisted into something unrecognizable. And then there were the prisoners. Those who had survived camps, gulags, and years behind barbed wire. They came home broken, often to find no home at all. Families gone, communities erased, their suffering unacknowledged. To speak of it was often dangerous or unwelcome, so they carried it silently, their memories locked behind eyes that saw too much. They were survivors, but they were not celebrated. The healers who had saved lives in the shadows were not honored either. Nurses who had bled in occupied hospitals, doctors who had healed in ghettos, stretcher-bearers who had carried men from the mud, they slipped back into anonymity. No monuments bore their names. Their war ended as it had begun, in silence, their compassion left unspoken in the stories told by governments that preferred tales of victory to memories of care. And the women, those who had resisted, who had carried messages, who had picked up rifles when none else could, who had suffered in ways too cruel to speak, they were asked to return to quiet, to homes, to invisibility. Their courage was folded into private memory, while public history turned its gaze elsewhere. In the end, the war did not end with fireworks for them. It ended in letters that never came, in pensions never paid, in graves left unmarked, in parades that marched without them. The world celebrated, but not for all. For millions, the silence that followed the guns was not peace, but abandonment. Still, they carried their memories forward. Around fires in villages, they told their children what it had been to march under foreign suns, to hear shells scream in skies far from home. In quiet conversations, they whispered names of comrades lost, names that no monument would preserve. They kept the songs, the scars, the fragments of a war that was theirs, even if history did not want it. The end of the war was written in victory speeches, in treaties, in photographs of jubilant crowds. But the truer ending lived in shadows, in the forgotten veterans who tilled fields with broken bodies, in the widows who waited for men who never returned, in the children who grew up hearing stories half told, fragments of battles never written in books. The guns fell silent, but memory never did. Memory lingered in scars, in silence, in the absence of recognition. And though the world tried to move on, beneath the noise of reconstruction and celebration, the quiet voices of the forgotten remained. They remain still if we choose to listen. Not in the parades, not in the monuments, but in the spaces history left empty. The war ended, but for them the silence was the heaviest burden of all. The world moves fast now. Cities hum with electricity, skies glow with satellites, and voices travel through wires in an instant. Yet beneath this rush of the present, echoes remain. They lie quiet in the soil of forgotten battlefields, in cemeteries where weeds crawl over headstones, in memorials that crumble unseen at the edge of towns. These are not the echoes of speeches or parades. They are the whispers of the forgotten, those whose names slipped from the records, whose sacrifice never reached the monuments. Walk through Africa, and you find graveyards where the markers are worn smooth, where the names have been erased by rain and time. In villages, elders still remember, telling children of uncles and brothers who marched away and never returned. Their stories drift like smoke, fragile and fading. A drumbeat once carried through camps at night. Now it is only memory, held by the few who choose to listen. In Asia, hidden in jungles or standing lonely beside roads, memorial stones lean into silence. Few visit them. Moss thickens, vines coil, the letters etched into stone disappear under green. And yet, if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear it. The breath of exhausted soldiers, the scrape of boots on mud paths, the cries of men lost to battles history barely recalls. The jungles that devoured them still hold their silence. Across oceans, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, on islands where battles came and went like storms, the traces of war remain faint but stubborn. Old landing strips overgrown with grass, rusting steel half buried in sand, coral reefs clutching wrecks of ships that once carried men who never saw their homes again. The waves still move over them, whispering the lullaby of those who drowned beneath the surface. The sea remembers even when men do not. In Europe, the great memorials stand, polished and honored, but tucked away in alleys or left in small towns are plaques no one reads, statues no one cleans. Flowers rot at their feet, forgotten by generations who hurry past. Yet the stones are not truly silent. They carry the weight of men and women who resisted, who died nameless, who are not remembered in grand speeches, but whose absence shaped the world that came after. The echoes are not only in stone and soil. They live in songs, fragile and fading, sung only by elders who still recall the rhythm of campfires, the lullabies of soldiers far from home, songs in languages long ignored by history's loudest voices, songs of grief, of longing, of courage, of loss. Some will die with the last voices that sing them. Yet even then they will linger in the air, carried faintly, if only someone chooses to listen. These forgotten soldiers still march, not in columns or in parades, but in memory. They walk beside us in the quiet moments when the wind shifts across fields, when church bells toll in villages, when the silence of night grows heavy. They are there in the shadows of our cities, in the corners of our histories, reminding us that the war was never only fought by generals or great powers. It was carried on the shoulders of millions unseen, men and women who fought, endured, suffered, and sacrificed without the promise of glory. Every step they took left a mark. Every burden they carried became part of the weight that shaped the future. Their hands built roads, carried stretchers, manned ships, planted flags that were never theirs. And though the world forgot their names, their lives ripple through the present in ways we cannot always trace. The food we eat, the freedoms we hold, the maps we follow, they all bear traces of those who were left behind in history's telling. To remember them is not only to look backward, it is to walk differently today, to move with the knowledge that greatness is not built only by the celebrated. It is shaped in silence, in toil, in sacrifice that no one applauds. The forgotten soldiers remind us that history is not a straight line of victories and defeats. It is a web of voices, most of them quiet, many of them ignored, but they matter. They always mattered. When we pause, when we choose to listen, we find them still, in overgrown cemeteries, in abandoned airfields, in the rusted bones of ships, in the lull of forgotten songs. They march on in silence, not demanding glory, only remembrance. They are not gone. They are waiting in the echoes, walking beside us even now. And so the question is ours. Do we let them fade, their memory lost to weeds, to silence, to oceans and skies that move on without them? Or do we carry them forward, whisper their names, tell their stories, sing their songs, and honor their lives? The forgotten soldiers still march, not in step with drums, but in step with time itself. They walk with us through streets and fields, through silence and song. And if we listen closely, we can hear them still, echoes that will never die so long as someone chooses to remember.